Princess Adanna stood abruptly from her seat in the palace, her heart pounding. A heavy uneasiness settled in her chest, a whisper of danger she could not ignore. She turned sharply, her voice trembling with urgency. "I need to check on Amara." Her hands clenched at her sides as she rushed through the palace halls. She knew how Amara must be feeling. Heartbroken, shattered, alone. For years, Amara had believed she would be queen. And now she had learned the truth. She was never meant to sit on the throne. Adanna's chest ached for her sister. Despite everything, despite the cruelty, the betrayal, the lies, she still loved her. She needed her. And deep down, she prayed it was not too late. She reached Amara's chamber and pushed the door open. Then her heart stopped. Amara stood in the dimly lit room, her back to the door. In her trembling hands, she held a goblet filled with a dark, deadly liquid. Adanna's breath caught in her throat. "No," she gasped. Before Amara could lift the goblet to her lips, Adanna rushed forward and snatched it from her hands. The goblet clattered to the floor, spilling the poisoned drink. Adanna grabbed Amara by the shoulders, shaking her. "What are you doing?" Her voice cracked with fear. Amara's eyes were hollow, her face wet with tears. "I don't deserve to live," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Adanna stared at her, heartbroken. "Don't say that," she cried. "I need you, Amara. Father needs you. The kingdom needs you." But Amara shook her head, more tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, Adanna. I have done too much. I have hurt you, humiliated you. I let jealousy and envy destroy everything we had." Her voice broke. "I have failed as a sister." Adanna felt tears welling in her own eyes. She could see the pain in Amara's face, the deep regret that consumed her. And yet, she did not see a monster. She only saw her sister. The same Amara who once held her hand as they ran through the palace gardens. The same Amara who used to braid her hair under the moonlight, whispering secrets only sisters could share. She took a shaky breath and cupped Amara's tear-streaked face. Her voice was soft yet filled with strength. "The river does not reject the water that once dirted it. It simply flows, cleansing itself with time." Amara's breath hitched. Her lips trembled. Adanna pulled her into a tight embrace. "I forgive you." Amara let out a choked sob and collapsed into her sister's arms. They held each other, their tears mixing together, years of pain and betrayal washing away. For the first time in a long time, they were just sisters again. But as they clung to each other in the quiet chamber outside, the kingdom of Udi remained in danger. Chief Chidi was still out there. The king was still dying. The throne was still at risk. And as much as they wanted this moment to last forever, war was coming. Chief Chidi sat on a cushioned stool outside his house, his face stretched in a victorious smile. The throne of Udi was almost his. King Afam was dying. Adanna had no husband. Amara was too late to fight back. Nothing could stop him now. He leaned back, praising himself in his mind. "I am a genius, the master planner of the Udi Kingdom." He had played Amara like a drum, turned the villagers against Adanna, and poisoned the king's body with slow death. His dream was about to become a reality. He chuckled softly, his mind drifting back to where it all began. Long ago, there were two brothers. Okafor, the eldest, the firstborn of their family, the one destined to lead. And Chidi, the younger, hungry for power, unwilling to live in his brother's shadow. Chidi clenched his jaw at the memory. If Okafor had remained in Udi, I would never have gotten this far. Okafor was respected, wise, and loved by the people. Had he stayed, he would have been a threat to Chidi's plans. So Chidi did what he did best. He lied. He planted fear in the hearts of the elders. He whispered words that turned even the king against his own most trusted man. It was Okafor who cursed the princess. It was Okafor who caused Adanna's deadly childhood sickness. He seeks the throne for himself. He has turned to dark magic. Chidi watched as panic spread. The people, who once loved Okafor, began to fear him. The king, who once trusted him, began to doubt. And when Okafor stood before the council of elders, pleading his innocence, it was Chidi and Ease the diviner who sealed his fate. Chidi exhaled deeply, shaking off the memory. Everything had gone according to plan. But then his smile faded. His chest tightened, because Okafor had a son. And that son was Nkem, a boy who had been forced into exile because of his father's false crimes. A boy who never knew the truth of his own bloodline. If Adanna ever found out, if she discovered who Nkem really was, it would be over for him. Chidi's eyes darkened. What if Amara turns against me? She now knew too much. She knew that Nkem's family was innocent. She knew the truth he had spent years burying. What if she tells Adanna? What if they unite against me? His fingers curled into a fist. I should have never revealed that secret to her. His mind raced. There was only one solution. I must find Nkem before she does. And this time, there would be no mistakes. The palace halls were silent, but Amara's sobs filled her father's chamber. She knelt beside the king's bed, her head lowered, her hands clutching his weak fingers. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Father, please forgive me." Her voice shook with regret. I was blinded by jealousy. I let greed take over my heart. I hurt my own sister. I failed you. The king's eyes fluttered open slightly. His lips moved, but the poison had made him too weak to speak. His fingers twitched in her grasp. He was trying to tell her something, but the words would not come. Her heart shattered. I have failed you, father. I have failed Udi. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. She turned to see Adanna standing beside her. Tears glistened in her sister's eyes. Do not cry, Amara, she whispered. Father will not die. We will be fine. Amara let out a shaky breath. She did not deserve kindness. She did not deserve forgiveness. Yet, Adanna was here, comforting her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like a sister again. Amara wiped her tears and took a deep breath. Her face hardened with determination. She turned to Adanna. We must protect the throne from our enemies. Adanna nodded. But how? Amara hesitated, then whispered. I have a plan. Adanna's brows furrowed. What plan? Amara took her sister's hands, gripping them tightly. I know where Nkem is. Adanna's breath hitched. Her heart pounded. What? He is in Oma, Amara said. You need to go to him. Adanna shook her head. I can't leave. Father. I will take care of father, Amara insisted. But you must go now. Adanna's mind raced. Nkem. The one person who had never feared her strength. The one person who had believed in her when no one else did. The one person who had loved her for who she was. You need to go fast, Amara urged. I don't trust Chief Chidi. If he finds Nkem first. Adanna's chest tightened. She knew what Amara meant. If Chief Chidi found Nkem before she did, he would kill him. Adanna clenched her fists. I will go. When you find him, bring him back here, Amara said. No one will ever know he is in the palace. He will be safe. Adanna took a deep breath. Then I must leave before it's too late. She turned toward the door. But as she did, a cold gust of wind rushed through the palace. The candles flickered, and for a moment, it felt as if the spirits of their ancestors were watching. The battle for Udi's throne had begun, and there was no turning back now. Adanna traveled swiftly to Oma, her heart pounding with every step. She had to find Nkem before Chief Chidi did. The fate of Udi depended on it. When she reached the small village, she wasted no time. She asked the villagers about a man from Udi named Nkem. Many shook their heads. Some avoided her gaze. Fear. No one wanted to be caught speaking about an outcast. But she was determined. After hours of searching, she found an old woman selling yams. The woman studied Adanna carefully. Who are you looking for, my daughter? A man named Nkem, Adanna replied, her voice urgent. He is from Udi. Please, I must find him. The woman's eyes softened. She pointed towards a small hut at the edge of the village. He lives there. Adanna's heart leaped. She rushed toward the hut, and when she pushed open the door, her breath caught. Nkem sat alone, staring into the fire. His face was calm, but his eyes held sorrow. When he looked up and saw her, everything else disappeared. Adanna, her lips trembled. It's me, Nkem. He stood slowly, as if afraid she was a dream. Then, She rushed into his arms. His strong embrace wrapped around her, holding her like he never wanted to let go. "I thought I would never see you again," he whispered. "I will always find my way back to you," she murmured, resting her forehead against his. For a moment, the world was silent. Just their heartbeats. Their love. Then, "We have to leave," Adanna whispered. Nkem pulled back slightly, confused. "What?" "Your life is in danger. Chief Chidi might be looking for you." Nkem's face darkened. "Who is Chief Chidi? And why is he looking for me?" "That is what I'm trying to figure out," Adanna said firmly. "Come with me. Amara said you'll be safe in the palace." Nkem's eyes widened. "Amara," he said bitterly. "I don't trust her." Adanna cupped his face gently. "She has changed, my love. I will tell you everything when we get to the palace." For a moment, Nkem hesitated. Then, looking into her pleading eyes, he nodded. They left at nightfall, slipping into the darkness unseen. Nkem disguised himself as a woman, wrapping his body in a large cloak and veil. Adanna led the way, her heart pounding at every step. If they were caught, it would be the end. Meanwhile, back in Udi, Chief Chidi was growing impatient. He had sent for his most trusted guards. They knelt before him, awaiting orders. "Find Nkem," he commanded. "Search every village, every border. He must not return to Udi alive." They spread out across the land, watching every traveler that entered or left. But weeks passed, and no one found Nkem. Little did they know, Nkem was already inside the palace. For weeks, Nkem remained hidden, secretly helping Adanna and Amara protect the throne. One night, he sat with Amara and Adanna in a quiet chamber. He turned to Amara. "Tell me what happened to the king," he said seriously. Amara lowered her head, guilt washing over her. "It was my fault," she whispered. Adanna placed a comforting hand on her sister's shoulder. "Go on," Nkem urged gently. Amara took a deep breath. "I gave him a love potion." Nkem's eyes narrowed. "A love potion?" "Yes," Amara confessed. "A witch doctor gave it to me. He said it would make my father love me more than Adanna. But it was a lie. It was poison." Her voice broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I never wanted to hurt him. I didn't know." Nkem studied her carefully. Then he held out his hand. "Do you still have it?" Amara nodded quickly. She rushed out of the chamber and returned moments later, holding a small vial. She placed it in Nkem's hands. He examined it closely. Then he smiled. "There is a remedy for this," he said confidently. "It will take time, but the king can be healed." Adanna and Amara stared at him, hope flickering in their eyes. "What do we do?" Adanna asked. Nkem's face grew serious. "I need herbs, but I cannot leave the palace. Chief Chidi's men are everywhere." Adanna's mind raced. Then she had an idea. "I know someone who can help." She called for the most trusted palace healer. The old man bowed before them. "We need your help," Adanna said urgently. "Can you gather the herbs Nkem needs?" The healer nodded without hesitation. "I will do whatever it takes to save the king." And so, the healing began. Each day, Nkem and the healer worked together, preparing the cure. Each night, they gave the king the medicine, praying it would work. But time was running out, and Chief Chidi was getting closer. Chief Chidi paced restlessly inside his chamber, his fingers tapping against his arm. His men had searched everywhere. No trace of Nkem. No sign of his whereabouts. And worse, King Afam was still alive. His patience was wearing thin. "Why is it taking so long?" he muttered under his breath. By now, the king should be dead. His throne should be empty. And Chidi should be sitting on it. Instead, the kingdom remained silent. No announcement of the king's passing. No whispers of a dying ruler. Nothing. Something was wrong. Chidi stood abruptly from his seat. He could not wait any longer. If no one would bring him news, he would get it himself. He grabbed his cloak, fastened his beads of authority, and stormed toward the palace. The guards at the entrance straightened as he approached. Their faces were stern, unreadable. Chidi lifted his chin. "I have come to see the king." The guards exchanged a glance. Then one of them stepped forward. "You cannot enter, Chief Chidi." Chidi's eyebrows shot up. His chest burned with rage. "Do you know who I am?" he snapped. "I am a titled chief of Udi. How dare you deny me access to my own king?" The guards did not flinch. The same guard repeated, "You cannot enter, my lord." Chidi's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to push past them, but he knew better. To fight the palace guards would be an act of treason, and he needed to stay in control. His eyes narrowed. "Fine," he spat, "but I will not forget this insult." With his cloak billowing behind him, he turned and marched away. His anger boiled inside him like a raging fire. He needed answers. He needed to know if the king was truly still alive. So he went to Alawu, the eldest chief of Udi, the most respected among the council. When he arrived, Alawu was sitting outside his hut, carving a piece of wood with a small knife. The elderly chief looked up, his wise eyes studying Chidi carefully. "Chief Chidi," he greeted calmly. "To what do I owe this visit?" Chidi did not bother with formalities. "I went to the palace," he said sharply. "The guards refused to let me see the king." Alawu nodded slowly, his knife continuing its steady movements. "And what do you expect me to do about that?" he asked. Chidi's nostrils flared. "Tell me the truth, Alawu," he demanded. "Are you sure the king is still alive?" Alawu finally set his carving down. He studied Chidi carefully, as if looking into his soul. Then, with a small sigh, he said, "Chief Chidi, you and I both know that when a king dies, the ancient Udi bird will cry all through the night." Chidi's body stiffened. Alawu continued, "It is the sign that the king has joined his ancestors." "But," he paused, "have you heard the bird's cries?" Chidi said nothing. Because he hadn't. The night had been silent. No wailing. No cries of mourning. Nothing. Which meant King Afam was still alive. Chidi's chest tightened. He had been so sure. He had been waiting for the night to bring news of the king's death. But it never came. Now he knew why. Something had gone terribly wrong. His plan was failing. Amara sat in the quiet chamber, her mind heavy with questions and regrets. Adanna and Nkem sat beside her, their expressions serious. For the first time, they were all on the same side. She turned to Nkem, her voice steady but curious. "Nkem, growing up in exile, did your father ever tell you why your family was banished?" Nkem's face darkened. His fingers tightened into fists, old pain surfacing. "He never spoke much about it," he admitted. "But I remember one thing." Adanna and Amara leaned in. Nkem's voice dropped, his eyes distant. "He told me that his own younger brother framed him." Amara froze. A strange chill ran down her spine. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is your father's name?" Nkem looked at her. Then, softly, he said, "Okafor." Silence. A silence so deep it felt like the palace itself had stopped breathing. Adanna's eyes widened. She had known Nkem as a child. She had known his family had been banished. But she had never known the full truth. Okafor. The same Okafor father always talked about. The same Okafor who had been branded a traitor. The same Okafor who was Chidi's own brother. Amara's hands trembled. Everything suddenly fell into place. Nkem was Chief Chidi's nephew. And Chief Chidi had destroyed his own brother's family to take power. Adanna's heart pounded. She turned to Nkem, her voice urgent. "Did your father ever mention who framed him? Did he ever say a name?" Nkem shook his head. "No, but he always said his own blood betrayed him." Amara's breath hitched. She knew the name. Chidi. His uncle. The man she had trusted. The man who had used her jealousy against her own sister. A storm of emotions swirled in her chest. Guilt, anger, disbelief. "It was Chief Chidi," she whispered. "He did this." Nkem's jaw tightened. Adanna closed her eyes, breathing deeply. The truth was clear now. Everything, the lies, the pain, the betrayal, all led back to one man. Chief Chidi had to be stopped. While they sat in shocked silence, another dangerous plot was brewing. Chief Chidi sat in his chamber, deep in thought. His plans were falling apart. He needed to act quickly. So he did what he did best. He bought loyalty. He sent for one of the palace guards, a man who had served in the palace for years. When he arrived, he said, "My lord, you sent for me." I need you to do something for me, Chidi said, placing a heavy bag of gold on the table. The guard's eyes flickered. What is it, my lord? Chidi leaned forward, his voice low and deadly. The king is weak. He will not survive much longer. But I need him gone now. The guard stiffened. You want me to? You know what to do, Chidi interrupted coldly. Make it look natural. A mistake. A simple accident. The guard hesitated. But when he looked at the gold before him, his greed won. He nodded. It will be done. As the guard left the chamber, a dark tension filled the air. Tonight the king would die. Tonight, the throne would move one step closer to Chidi's hands. But fate had other plans. Because at that very moment, deep inside the palace, the royal healer rushed through the palace halls, his breath heavy with urgency. His feet barely touched the ground as he ran toward Adanna's chambers. He burst through the door, his eyes wide with excitement. Princess Adanna. Nkem. Princess Amara. Come quickly. Adanna jumped to her feet, her heart pounding. What is it? She asked. The healer's voice trembled with joy. The king's eyes, they are open. For a moment, no one moved. Then they ran. They burst into King Afam's chamber, their eyes searching for the truth. And there he was, the king, awake. His body was weak, but his eyes were alive. Amara fell to her knees. Tears streamed down her face as she crawled toward the bedside. Father, she sobbed. Please forgive me. The king's gaze rested on her. He opened his mouth, his voice a whisper. I can't. Amara let out a broken cry. Adanna and Nkem dropped to their knees beside her. Father, please, Adanna begged. She was deceived. She was lost, Nkem added softly. The king's breath was slow, but his pain was clear. He looked at Amara, his eyes dark with sorrow. Why? He whispered. Why did you go so far to kill me? Amara sobbed harder. Haven't I been a good father to you? His voice, though weak, carried heartbreak. Haven't I loved you as my daughter? Where did I go wrong? Amara shook her head violently. No, father. You didn't do anything wrong. Her hands clawed at her chest as she spoke through choked cries. I thought you loved Adanna more than me. Her words shattered the air like glass. I wanted you to love me more than her, so I went to Chief Chidi for help. Adanna and Nkem exchanged sharp glances. Amara's voice trembled. He took me to a witch doctor who gave me a potion. He told me it was a love potion, but it was poison. She looked up at her father, her face wet with tears. I never wanted this to happen. The room fell silent. Then, Chief Chidi did what? The king's weak body shook with anger. His hands gripped the sheets. His breathing grew heavy. Adanna grabbed his hand. Father, calm down. You need to rest. Nkem placed a hand on his shoulder. This is not good for your health, your majesty. The king closed his eyes briefly, trying to regain his strength. A long breath left his lips. Then, after a moment, he looked at Amara. His fingers twitched slightly. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, I forgive you. Amara let out a shaky sob and buried her face into his hands. The king's eyes softened. You are my daughter. I will always love you. Adanna wiped a tear from her cheek as she watched them. Then, the king's gaze turned serious. Listen to me. His voice was low but firm. No one must know I am getting better. Adanna and Amara stiffened. Nkem nodded slowly. The king turned to his most trusted palace guard. Make sure this remains a secret.